So here's the thing about drug interdiction patrols in the southern Caribbean. They're supposed to be routine, boring even. You track radar contacts, you intercept go-fasts loaded with cocaine, you process suspects, you move on. What you don't expect is getting lit up by a foreign government's patrol boat at dawn with anti-materiel rounds designed to punch through armored vehicles. But that's exactly what happened to the crew of the USCGC Stone on a quiet Tuesday morning, 18 nautical miles off Venezuela's coast. And the response? Let's just say it became a masterclass in why attacking U.S. vessels, even Coast Guard cutters, is a catastrophically bad idea. It's 6:12 a.m. The Stone, a Legend-class national security cutter, bristling with sensors and a 57mm deck gun, is cruising northward through international waters. Known drug corridor, clean radar picture, first light breaking over the horizon. The kind of morning where you're thinking about coffee, not combat. Then the world explodes. Heavy caliber fire, 14.5mm rounds, scream across the water and slam into the cutter's aft section. Sparks fly, metal shrieks, alarms detonate across every compartment. In about 2 seconds, every sailor on that ship goes from half awake to full combat mode because somebody just made the kind of mistake that ends careers and starts international incidents. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, ask yourself this. If you're a commanding officer and hostile fire just tore into your ship in international waters, what's your first move? Hold fire and hope they stop. Run? Or remind them exactly what a modern U.S. warship can do when provoked. Give this video a like, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications because this story is about to get intense. This wasn't some random act of maritime stupidity. The Stone was operating in one of the hottest smuggling zones in the Western Hemisphere, a stretch of water where U.S. Coast Guard, Navy assets, and intel agencies had been tracking a massive uptick in narco traffic departing Venezuelan harbors. Every cutter on station knew the region was heating up. Political rhetoric from Caracas was getting sharper. Accusations of American intrusion, threats of defensive action, the usual authoritarian posturing when you're losing control of your own coastline to cartels. But here's the thing. The Stone wasn't intruding on anything. It was sitting 18 nautical miles offshore, international waters, completely legal. The 12-mile territorial limit isn't a suggestion. It's international maritime law. Beyond that line, U.S. vessels have every right to patrol, track, and interdict smugglers under long-standing counter-narcotics agreements. And that's exactly what the Stone was doing when it picked up a suspicious surface contact. Small vessel, moving north. AIS transponder deliberately shut off. Erratic speed changes, the kind of behavior that screams, drug runner trying to blend into background. Traffic. Coast Guard crews see dark contacts constantly, but this one had all the hallmarks. Weird drift patterns, refusal to identify, zigzagging like it was trying to shake surveillance. The Stone adjusted course slightly to maintain observation. Standard procedure. Meanwhile, the broader strategic picture was deteriorating fast. Days earlier, U.S. officials had publicly warned that cartel-linked vessels were operating with what looked like state support out of Venezuelan ports. Washington framed it as law enforcement. Caracas fired back, accusing the U.S. of militarizing the Caribbean and violating their economic exclusion zone, which, by the way, is not the same thing as territorial waters and doesn't give you the right to shoot at foreign ships. Then things got weird. A Venezuelan patrol boat appeared on radar and started closing fast. No radio call, no identification signal, No predictable approach vector. Just a hard, aggressive angle, like it was trying to box the Stone in or test how the Americans would react. On the bridge, the watch team ran procedures: helm steady, fire control on standby, comms monitoring every frequency for a hail that never came. The crew had trained for tense encounters with unpredictable foreign actors. But what happened next wasn't tense. It was hostile. Without warning, a burst of 14.5mm fire ripped across the water and tore into the Stone's aft structure. Let's be crystal clear about what that means. A 14.5mm round is not a warning shot. It's not a "hey, back off" kind of gesture. It's an anti-materiel weapon originally designed to disable light armor, wreck engines, and shred hardened equipment. Militaries use it to kill machinery, not send diplomatic messages. When those rounds impact steel, there's no ambiguity. The message is already delivered. The crew's response was immediate: impact alarms screaming, flight deck personnel hitting the deck, gunners' mates sprinting to battle stations. On the bridge, the CO understood instantly. A foreign state vessel had just fired live rounds at a U.S. cutter in international waters. That's a line almost no nation dares to cross. And it had just been crossed by a patrol boat barely larger than the Stone's helicopter pad. In that instant, the delicate balance between restraint and retaliation collapsed. The Stone couldn't assume the fire would stop, couldn't assume this was a misunderstanding, couldn't assume the next burst wouldn't hit the bridge or magazine. Decision time, and the math was brutally simple. Once you fire on an American ship, there's only one response left. The moment those rounds struck, the Stone's bridge transitioned from peacetime patrol to wartime rules of engagement. The commanding officer gave the authorization every cutter captain carries but rarely uses: return fire to defend the ship. Within seconds, the fire control system spun up. Electro-optical sensors locked. Range data flooded the displays. Automated tracking clamped onto the hostile vessel's silhouette, bouncing unevenly across the swells. The Stone's primary weapon, the Mk110 57mm deck gun, rotated smoothly into firing position. Unlike the crude, manually aimed heavy machine gun that had just attacked them, the 57mm system is a precision instrument. It integrates radar tracking, optical confirmation, and a gyro-stabilized fire control computer that keeps rounds on target even in rough seas. That morning, the sea state was calm. Conditions favored the Americans. At the weapons console, the gunner's mate confirmed target lock. The Venezuelan boat was close enough to see its wake through the camera, but far enough that the Stone had tactical space to respond. The CO gave the order, and the cutter's bow erupted in a sharp, controlled burst of fire. The first salvo of 58mm rounds cut across the water in a tight, deliberate pattern. These weren't warning shots. They weren't meant to scare. They were fired exactly as Coast Guard rules of engagement prescribe, aimed to disable the threat while minimizing unnecessary destruction. The rounds impacted just forward of the patrol boat's engine compartment, forcing it to shear violently as shrapnel peppered the deck. The gunner adjusted aim as the fire control system compensated for the boat's evasive turn. The second burst landed closer to the cabin, striking near the mounting point of the 14.5mm gun that started this whole mess. Through the Stone's optics, the crew watched the hostile gunners scramble away from the destroyed weapon mount. Smoke began pouring from damaged deck plating. Despite taking hits, the Venezuelan boat didn't retreat. It tried to close distance again, a move that placed it directly in the Stone's firing arc. The cutter responded with a third controlled volley, this time aimed At the upper structure, where sensors and controls were likely housed, several rounds punched into the cabin area, forcing the patrol boat into a hard yaw to port. A column of dark smoke billowed as internal systems failed. At no point did the Stone's crew exceed their rules of engagement. Every burst was measured, every impact assessed in real time. The objective wasn't to sink the vessel, it was to stop it from continuing an armed attack. The discipline on display was the product of decades balancing law enforcement missions with combat-ready protocols. A service that understands restraint is part of strength, even under fire. Finally, the Venezuelan patrol boat started losing maneuverability. Smoke trailing from the cabin, debris scattered across its decks, it slowed, hesitated, then turned south, limping back toward the territorial waters it came from. The Stone maintained tracking but didn't pursue. The cutter held position, bow oriented toward the retreating threat, ready for round two but refusing to escalate beyond necessary force. Within minutes, the hostile vessel was nothing more than a smudge on the horizon. What remained visible was the thick plume of smoke marking its damaged systems, and the unmistakable message it carried home. Attacking a U.S. cutter, even with surprise and proximity, will not end well for you. On the Stone's bridge, the crew rapidly transitioned from combat to damage assessment. Repair teams checked the aft section for structural compromise. Weapons officers reviewed ammo expenditure and confirmed the 50mm system was ready for further action if required. Communications relayed a full battle report up the chain. Everything recorded, logged, documented, essential when engagements involve state actors. But there was another truth settling in that morning. The Stone's response, as precise and restrained as it was, wouldn't be the end of this confrontation. The United States never allows attacks on its vessels to stand unanswered. The cutter had defended itself, but the broader machinery of American sea power was already in motion, and the fight wasn't over, because every attack on a U.S. ship brings something far larger in its wake. For the Stone's crew, the gunfight ended when the Venezuelan boat disappeared into the haze. But for U.S. command, the incident was just beginning. A state vessel had fired on an American cutter in international waters, an act that triggers response protocols far above any single captain's authority. The Stone's comms team moved fast. Battle damage imagery transmitted within minutes, impact points on the aft rail, scorched antenna mounts, sensor logs showing incoming fire trajectories, high-resolution footage of the Venezuelan boat retreating under smoke. Navigational data confirmed the Stone's position 18 nautical miles from the Venezuelan coastline, well outside any territorial claim. Everything documented, time-stamped, and sent up the chain with a simple summary. Attacked. Returned fire. Situation stable but unresolved. Within the regional command center, that message wasn't treated as a skirmish. It was treated as a potential international incident. The U.S. doesn't tolerate ambiguity when foreign governments fire on its military vessels. Even if it's just a Coast Guard cutter, every branch understands the principle. A hit on one is a hit on the uniform. Which is why, less than 10 minutes after the Stone's report, orders went out to 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers already operating in the Caribbean, USS Gravely and USS Porter. Both ships had been conducting presence patrols tied to the broader 2025 maritime security posture, an expanded U.S. footprint designed to blunt cartel traffic, deter hostile regimes, and reassure regional partners. Their normal patrol pattern kept them far enough apart to cover massive ocean areas, but close enough to mutually reinforce within hours. The Stone's report collapsed that spacing instantly. the destroyers turned toward the cutter at flank speed. These ships aren't symbolic assets. Each is a 9,000-ton warship equipped with the Aegis combat system, vertical launch cells loaded with SM-2 and ESSM surface-to-air missiles, long-range Tomahawks, and a full suite of defensive tools designed to control airspace and sea lanes. Their arrival isn't a gesture. It's a message written in steel. As the sun climbed higher, the Gravely appeared first, its silhouette emerging from the morning light like a dark wedge of armor. Minutes later, Porter followed from a different vector, establishing a layered formation. From the Stone's bridge, the view was unmistakable. 2 U.S. destroyers positioning themselves between the cutter and the Venezuelan coastline, forming what sailors call a wall of steel. The image alone carried diplomatic weight. Any radar operator watching from Venezuela would see 2 distinct Aegis signatures interposing themselves in deliberate shield posture. That formation sent a clear, uncomplicated warning. Any further aggression would be answered by something far beyond a single cutter's deck gun. Gravely assumed lead position closest to the Venezuelan coast, its sensors pointed inland, absorbing and mapping every radar pulse and electronic emission from shore. Porter positioned farther out, covering broader air and sea approaches. The Stone held center, protected but not passive, ready to continue its lawful mission. From above, it looked like textbook American naval doctrine: protect the vulnerable unit, escalate the defensive envelope, stabilize the environment with overwhelming capability. The Caribbean has seen countless Coast Guard operations over the decades, but it's only when Navy destroyers arrive that the full weight of U.S. power becomes visible. And make no mistake, the presence of 2 destroyers was intentional. 1 would have been enough for safety. 2 sends a different message entirely. We're not reacting, we're establishing control. Regional analysts noted something else. In 2025, the Caribbean had become a complex battle space, cartel-linked fast boats operating with more sophistication, Venezuelan military units bolder in challenging U.S. patrols, intelligence indicating foreign advisors increasingly active in the region. Against that backdrop, the sudden appearance of 2 heavily armed destroyers was a demonstration of both readiness and resolve. For the Stone's crew, still inspecting battle damage and resetting stations, the arrival of Gravely and Porter was more than reassurance. It was a reminder that no Coast Guard vessel, no matter how isolated its patrol route, ever operates alone. Behind every cutter lies a layered network of surveillance aircraft, strike-capable ships, and rapid response forces ready to intervene the moment a threat crosses the line. But while the destroyer's presence stabilized the area, it also raised an uncomfortable question. If a single rogue patrol boat could trigger a response of this magnitude, what would happen if something larger, something intentional occurred next? Was this deterrence, or the first hint of a larger confrontation waiting just beyond the horizon? The moment, Gravely and Porter positioned themselves between the Stone and the Venezuelan coastline. The confrontation shifted from tactical engagement to political theater, where every word carried as much weight as every round fired. Caracas moved first, announcing the gunfire had been nothing more than a misidentification error, insisting their patrol boat reacted, believing an unknown vessel was probing sensitive maritime zones, and that the burst of 14.5 mm fire reflected confusion rather than intent. Washington responded with firmly documented rebuttal. The Stone had been operating well beyond the 12 nautical mile boundary, conducting lawful counter-narcotics patrol. The Venezuelan vessel had neither issued radio calls nor attempted identification before opening fire. Instead of reinforcing Venezuela's claims of confusion, video transmitted by the Stone clearly showed the patrol boat closing distance with weapon elevated, AIS signature irregular, and the unmistakable muzzle flash of heavy machine gun fire cutting across the waves. As both versions reached international audiences, the gap between them widened in ways that made compromise nearly impossible. Analysts across multiple networks pointed out that 14.5mm rounds are never classified as warning fire. Naval protocols worldwide reserve them for fully lethal engagements. Even countries with strained relations rarely allow patrol craft to escalate without attempting communication. Maritime law specialists added that geographic data alone undermined Caracas's justification. No interpretation of territorial norms places a U.S. cutter 18 nautical miles offshore inside Venezuelan waters. Despite these realities, Venezuelan officials began adjusting their message throughout the day, shifting from accidental engagement to accusations that U.S. patrols were operating provocatively close to their maritime borders. That shift, rather than clarifying the situation, highlighted political pressure within Caracas, where acknowledging responsibility could undermine both domestic legitimacy and regional influence. Meanwhile, American officials maintained a single position. The attack was unprovoked, illegal, and potentially tied to broader patterns of cartel-aligned activity in the region. This clash of narratives created an information battleground extending far beyond diplomatic communiques. Cable news filled screens with satellite maps, AIS plots, and slow-motion analysis of muzzle flashes. Commentators debated rules of engagement, questioned Venezuela's shifting explanations, and warned that even brief firefights at sea can spiral into wider conflict if governments perceive strategic intent rather than human error. On social platforms, users circulated high-resolution radar captures and vessel tracking data, creating a parallel layer of civilian analysis that amplified global attention on the standoff. While the public argued over which government was telling the truth, strategic consequences became undeniable. Every confrontation at sea, especially one involving state vessels, forces both countries to demonstrate resolve. Washington couldn't afford to treat the attack lightly without signaling vulnerability to other actors in the region. Likewise, Caracas, already under economic and political strain, couldn't afford to appear subordinate to U.S. power without risking internal fractures within its military hierarchy. As tensions hardened, regional movements shifted accordingly. Merchant ships reported unusual Venezuelan patrol patterns. U.S. reconnaissance flights expanded coverage arcs. The two destroyers guarding the Stone adjusted posture to maximize deterrence while avoiding actions that might trigger escalation. The Caribbean, once routine operating space, became an arena where a single mistake could carry consequences far beyond the horizon. Yet, the most consequential development wasn't broadcast in press conferences or argued on talk shows. The real turning point emerged from within Venezuela's own command structure, where leaked information fundamentally challenged the government's narrative. The order to fire hadn't come from the officer Caracas claimed to defend, and the identity of the true decision-maker would change everything. In the hours after the firefight, political fallout inside Venezuela accelerated rapidly, especially once the patrol boat's captain was quietly detained, a move that contradicted the government's misidentification claim and exposed deeper fractures within its naval chain of command. Washington interpreted the arrest as implicit acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Rather than easing its response, U.S. officials emphasized that no internal disciplinary action could erase the fact that a U.S. cutter had been fired upon in international waters, elevating the incident from tactical error to direct challenge to American authority. While Caracas attempted to cool tensions through calls for restraint, the Stone returned to its mission under dramatically altered conditions, now operating beneath a continuous Navy security umbrella formed by Gravely, Porter, and a rotating network of P-8 patrol aircraft and drones. This reinforced posture signaled a broader strategic shift. The United States recognized Coast Guard crews working near Venezuelan waters were no longer facing only traffickers, but also the possibility of state-backed escalation, blurring traditional separation between law enforcement patrols and forward military presence. As U.S. commanders adopted this new model, planners highlighted how a joint Navy-Coast Guard posture would deter further incidents, test adversary behavior, and stabilize a region where criminal networks and political tension increasingly overlap. Meanwhile, Venezuela struggled with the political cost of its shifting explanations as military officers questioned whether the government had pushed its own navy into a confrontation it could never hope to win. Across the Caribbean, shipping lanes shifted, regional partners increased intelligence sharing, and Coast Guard crews received new guidance reflecting a more dangerous operating environment. What began as a brief clash at sea had quietly reshaped the balance of power across an entire theater. And from this point forward, the central issue was no longer the shots already fired, but the ones that might follow. The confrontation that began with a burst of 5.95mm fire ended with a clear demonstration of how the United States responds when its crews come under attack. The USCGC Stone absorbed the first strike, returned accurate 55mm fire that forced the Venezuelan patrol boat to retreat, and held position until two U.S. destroyers arrived to draw a firm line across the Caribbean. By the time Caracas shifted its narrative and detained its own captain, the strategic picture had already been set. The United States would not allow ambiguity, and the region understood exactly who controlled the sea. This incident reinforced a simple truth that often goes unnoticed. America's strength doesn't come only from advanced ships or powerful weapons, but from the discipline of its crews, the speed of its command decisions, and the unmatched reach of its naval forces. The United States doesn't seek confrontation in the Caribbean, but it will never step back when its vessels are targeted. Looking ahead, tensions will remain high as Venezuela tests boundaries, cartels exploit uncertainty, and regional actors adjust their posture. But U.S. presence will continue to anchor stability across these waters. America's strength protects every lane, every ship, every crew. If you want more breakdowns of real frontline confrontations like this, smash that like button, subscribe to stay locked in, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We'll see you next time.